4-6 adequate notice of this meeting has been provided by advertising in the Star Ledger, El Nuevo Coquí, Haiti Progrès, and Luiso Americano newspapers, and by distribution to administrative offices of the Newark Public Schools. A copy of this meeting notice was forwarded to City Hall for posting. This is a regular advisory board meeting, Tuesday, October 26, 2010. Mr. Jeffries. Here. Ms. King. Here. Mr. Lamore. Mr. Lewis.
Here.
Ms. Pintor.
Here.
Mr. Rivera.
Here.
Ms. Romero. Ms. Davis-Spate. Ms. White.
Thank you. We want to welcome everyone to our advisory board meeting. Thank everyone for coming out. We'll go right to our flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Turn things over to the principal of Dayton, Mr. Carson, and we'll have some greetings from the young people from Dayton Elementary.
Good evening, everyone. Dr. Janey, Ms. White, Ms. Wilson, advisory board members, guests, we want to welcome you wholeheartedly to Dayton Street School. And I want to show you how we feel about you being here at Dayton. And I'd like to ask my staff and my students to please stand to show their support of Dayton Street School, school that is now on the move. Stand. I want to also thank Mr. Richardson, our social studies teacher, who is responsible for our entertainment prior to this meeting. And I'm going to ask Mr. Richardson if he would please go ahead. If he would introduce the members of his band that came out with him this evening. You could do that, Mr. Richardson.
First of all, it's an honor. Good evening, everyone. Good evening to the deity. On bass, Mr. Ross Alston from Morristown, New Jersey. From Hillside, New Jersey, Mr. Mike Morgan. From Una, New Jersey, on the drums, Alvin Burnett Jr. And from Barringer High School, music teacher and the MD of the Posse, Greg Sneed.
Good. I also, before we said, I want to thank our music teacher, Ms. Cynthia Wade, and our students who are here to perform 2 songs for you this evening. And we are so happy that they're out here. Thank you, students. We're so happy that you're here today for a number of reasons. Number one, to showcase the great things that have been happening at Dayton Street School. We made AYP this year, and we're so excited about that, that it's important to us. This is the first time in quite a few years that we've done that, so I want to thank my staff and students for that acknowledgement, too. I also want to speak on behalf of Dayton Street School being the recipient of a grant, a school improvement grant, in the amount of $3,483,000 over the next 3 years. We put a lot of time. I was speaking to Ms. White this morning prior to this evening, prior to our meeting, and we talked about what went into this grant and the development, and it's because the entire school community is part of that that we're seeing the success that we're going to see this school year because of that. It's giving us the resources to do the things we need to do at Dayton Street School. We have 3 simple goals. Number 1, to ensure that we have highly effective teachers in front of our children that are teaching them on a regular basis using curriculum that is aligned to the New Jersey Core curriculum standards and that is data-driven. To make sure that we continue to build our school unity with student leadership and mentoring. And number 3, to make certain that we attain our 75% student benchmark on achievement. These are our goals. These are simple, but this is our task ahead of us. And I want to thank you very much for being here with us. And I invite everyone to look around our school this evening after the meeting and see the kind of student work that is displayed and the feedback that our teachers are giving them so that they can grow. I want to introduce for greetings my parent liaison, Ms. Salima Gordon. Ms. Gordon? Okay, she probably didn't know she was going on at this point. We'll get to Ms. Gordon afterwards. Mr. Richardson, Ms. Wade, students, thank you so much. If you just sit back and enjoy the moment of entertainment that they're going to give you, and then we'll move on. Thank you again for being here.
I'm sorry, I just want to introduce our parent, Ms. Rhonda Porter. Let's give her a hand. And now our parent liaison. Let's give her a hand as she comes. Good evening. I would like to welcome you to Dayton Street School. My name is Miss Gordon. I am the parent liaison for Dayton Street School. Thank you for coming out.
Another round of applause, please, for the young people of Dayton Street Elementary. I'll turn things over to our superintendent, Dr. Janey, for a very special presentation for some of our young people receive a very important reward and recognition.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. Good evening. Mr. Costin, thank you very much for your warm welcome here this evening at Dayton Street. It's an honor for us to recognize not only students who have earned a very special recognition for this evening, but I want to first thank the adults who are here and the students who are here, because too often we hear so much about bad teachers. We had teachers here this evening who did this on their own time because they wanted to, not because they had to, and I want to thank them. And as we go forward in the program, it's now a privilege to recognize 4 students from the Newark Public Schools who are being awarded each with $10,000 for their college education. This award comes to them because they earn the distinction of being not only college-bound, but college-ready. They prepared, they demonstrated their academic excellence, they demonstrated as well their commitment to their community through service, and they thirdly dedicated themselves to become young student leaders and hopefully voters of tomorrow to make sure we get the right people in office at the national, state, and local levels. Last year we had one recipient. Her name was, I think I saw Ms. Crawford here this evening. The parent of the recipient from last year, one of 5 recipients statewide in New Jersey, was a graduate of the Newark Public Schools. Of the 5 recipients this year, we have 4 from Newark out of the 5. They are 4 seniors from Science Park High School, and they are 4 of the only 14 students acknowledged with this $10,000 scholarship by Nostrum in the nation of the 50 states. There are only 14, and 4 of those 14, 4 of the 5 from New Jersey come from Newark. So let them come up, please. Ms. Merritt, would you join them, please, and any members of the faculty of the administration of Science Park, from which the 4 students are going to be graduating? Would you come forward? And any members of the staff or family members, please feel free to come forward.
Thank you, Dr. Janey. We do have 3 of the 4 students here. Again, like you said, they're all from Science Park School. The first certificate, and this is on behalf of the Nordstrom Scholarship Program. Chad is commended for his strong academic standing, community service awards, and honor, along with a well-written essay, which resulted in a $10,000 scholarship award from the Nordstrom's Northeast Region Scholarship Program. Chad?
I appreciate being acknowledged for this award, and thank you.
The next recipient is Evelise Tirado, also from Science Park. Evelise is commended for her strong academic standing, community service award and honor, along with a well-written essay, which resulted in a $10,000 scholarship. Ms. Crawford is accepting on her behalf. And like Dr. Janey said, Ms. Crawford's daughter actually won the scholarship last year, the only young lady from Science Park. The next recipient is Sarah. Sarah is commended for her strong academic standing, community service award, and honor, along with a well-written essay, which resulted in a $10,000 scholarship. Sarah?
It is with great honor that I accept this award, and I want to thank the Newark Public School system that has prepared me to accept this award. Thank you so much.
The next young man smiles often. Mr. Amaru Washington is commended for his strong academic standing, community service award, and honors, along with a well-written essay, which resulted in a $10,000 scholarship, again on behalf of Nordstrom's regional area.
Thank you so much. Good evening. It is an honor to be accepting this recognition. As a student of Science Park, we always strive to keep ourselves motivated and keep other students at the best that they could be. So I hope that we are honors. We are good or role model for other students to recognize.
Unfortunately, the principal, Mr. Lamont Thomas, could not be here. Any representation from Science Park? These two. Stand with the students. Mr. McCollum.
Good evening. On behalf of Mr. Thomas, Principal of Science Park High School, and all the faculty and staff, I want to thank the advisory board and congratulating our seniors for this award. Finding scholarships is a hard deal, but these four took it upon themselves to take the initiative and apply, and only good things happen when you research and you find what you want. So once again, I want to congratulate the four.
We'll look at our minutes of our advisory board meeting. We'll turn to our minutes, approval of the minutes with respect to the June 15, 2010 regular advisory board meeting, as well as with respect to the special advisory board meeting and ethics workshop we held on July 12th. Does anyone have any changes, additions, deletions from the minutes first of the June 15, 2010 board meeting? Do you have a motion? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. For the minutes? Okay. Vote Barb. We have a second from the vice chair. For this, we'll just do a voice vote because I don't think there's any issues on this. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? Do we have a motion to accept the minutes of the July 12th, 2010 Special Advisory Board meeting and ethics workshop? Mr. Lewis, do we have a second? Vice Chair, take a voice vote on this. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motions are accepted. We will now move to consider a motion to move the time of the advisory board's business meetings from 5 o'clock to 5:30. As I'm sure the public knows, the board holds business meetings the week before this meeting, before the public meeting, and those meetings are really intended as an opportunity to really get into the depth of some of the issues that we're wrestling with as a district. I know it's been difficult for parents, as well as some of our colleagues on the board members, but particularly for parents to make those meetings at 5 o'clock. So we have a motion to move the meetings from 5 to 5:30. We have a movement, the vice chair. Do we have a second? Ms. Pentor. Take a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you. So that motion is passed. We have a motion. I'll turn this over to Board Member Lewis, who presented a motion at our business meeting last week to rename the Poet Room at the Marion Bolden Student Center in honor of Newarker Mary Baraka. So, Mr. Lewis, do you want to?
Good evening. We have in our city a lot of history to look at, and I wanted to make a motion to this board to name the poetry room in the student center the Mary Baraka Suite. Amir Baraka, a longtime Newarker, born in the city in 1934 of October 7th, a Barringer graduate, a poet, a writer, community activist. It was nothing that happened in this city that Amir Baraka was not involved in. We talk about the first black mayor of this city, Amir Baraka was a part of. We talk about the first ever black and Latino convention in this city, Amir Baraka was a part of. He went around this world traveling to represent this city and this state on dignity and in honor. I believe that we need to give people honor when it's due, give them their flowers while they're still alive. I don't want to wait until this man go home to heaven to say we need to honor Amir Baraka. Throughout this country, everyone know who Amir Baraka is. If you go online and you Google famous poets, you will see Amir Baraka, also known as Leroy Jones. Amir Baraka have served this city, and I believe that we as a board need to honor this man, and I think that this is just the beginning for the city to honor him by naming a street after him, doing something in recognition to Amir Baraka. So at this time, I will ask my colleagues to entertain my motion, and please pass this motion on behalf of Amir Baraka. Actually, Mr. Chair, I invited Mr. Baraka here. I don't know if he's here yet or not, but I did want him at least stand so we could give him a... He's not here.
Is Mr. Baraka in the building?
Well, also,
Any member of the Baraka family?
No.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second? We have the vice chair. Do we have any discussion on the motion? Okay, so we can move to. Oh, I'm sorry, vice chair. I'm sorry, vice chair.
I just wanted to take the opportunity to concur with Mr. Lewis about this motion, because not only Amiri Baraka participated in the things that Mr. Lewis discussed, that he initiated it, organized it, and he was one of the people that led the way for the first black mayor here in the city of Newark. And I personally had the opportunity to be involved in that organization, so I know where we have come to now. And a lot of times, as Mr. Lewis said, that people are not recognized while they are alive, and that's what we should do, is praise people while they're here for their good work. So I just want to concur with him in terms of that recognition. I think it's long overdue, and I think it's a part of our history that not only our students, but our entire community should learn more, not only in terms of Amiri Baraka, but all the leaders and people who have done things here in the city of Newark. So once again, I appreciate you bringing this motion. I think it's long overdue, and I want to thank you for it.
Any other discussion? Is there going to move to a vote? Call the roll.
Mr. Jeffries?
Yes.
Ms. King?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Absolutely.
Ms. Pintor?
Yes.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. White?
The motion is passed. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. I'm gonna exercise the prerogative of the chair to move some things around on the agenda right now. We're gonna move our votes on the academic services resolutions, the finance resolutions. We're gonna move these right now for discussion. If we can first take these one by one, first the academic services, and then we'll go to the finance. Do we have any questions? Any questions on the academic services resolution? Do we have a motion? Ms. White, second. Ms. Pintor, call the roll, please, Ms. Pollard.
Mr. Jeffries?
Yes.
Ms. King? Yes. Mr. Lewis? Ms. Pintor? Yes. Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. White?
We'll move now to the financial resolutions. Any questions about Ms. Wilson?
Good evening, Advisory Board Chair Jeffries, Advisory Board members, Superintendent Janey. In addition to the items that were presented to the Financial Committee, I have 2 additional items for presentation this evening. One being the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act Part B, or IDEA-B, related to IDEA Basic and IDEA Preschool funds. These are grant funds that we are voting to accept. I do apologize for the lateness of the items. I'm still trying to work on people understanding deadlines and time schedules. The second item, Ms. Pintor, can I borrow the other item? The second item is in association with the math curriculum and the adoption of that curriculum, which we had a presentation on, I think, at last month's board meeting and at this month's business meeting with regards to the math program. There are everyday count math kits and math in focus professional development that must occur with a vendor for a total of $187,000. That item is being presented tonight for your approval.
Ms. Wilson, with respect to the IDEA, is this the correct form? Because I don't see the approvals on this form. Are these approvals unnecessary? Or?
No, these approvals will be secured after you have voted. Normally, they would have been prior to, had people met the prescribed deadlines. I've had a significant conversation with the accountant associated with IDEA, and we'll be speaking to the Special Ed Executive Director about this matter. The grant has been submitted, and this is approval, as it were, for the application. The date that was given in the grant submittal, which was prepared sometime in September, was today's date to be associated with the board meeting, but apparently the follow-up that was required was not done.
And the bottom line, this is the grant so we can get our IDEA allotment to provide kids with disability services they require?
That is correct, Mr. Jeffers.
Thank you. I had a couple questions about a couple items in the packet, Ms. Wilson. On P4, could you just provide the amounts in my materials? I didn't have a ceiling listed for those contracts.
P4 is for home instruction, and there are 5 various vendors. Let me find the item.
It's in the back.
Does anybody have it ready? You can go on to the next question. I'm locating that. Hold on. I got it.
For P8,
P4, I found it, I'm sorry. It's for home instruction, and it is for a value not to exceed $650,000. There are no minimum or maximum expenditures on this. As I indicated, it is on an as-needed basis, depending on what happens with the student population. We do not typically overexpend the balance that they've indicated here, but it is on an as-needed basis.
I had a quick question also, Ms. Lewis, about Ms. Wilson, about the P8. That's a contract. Looks like we're paying for a consultant to do a feasibility study for generating new revenue. I just want to have a bit more context for that.
This particular contract is a consultant that we have worked with in the past. If you were not on the board at the time, I'm trying to think who might have been. In the last probably 2.5 years, we have installed cellular towers on 7 of our schools. Those schools include West Side, South 17th, Carver. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head. This consultant works with us to deal with the vendors who have responded to a request for bid, indicating the price in rentals they would pay for leasing space on the roofs with the cellular towers. We also provide community meetings. This was presented before the board prior to our awarding contracts. As we go through the negotiation process with the vendor, whether it be T-Mobile, Verizon, or some other carrier, there is a community involvement piece, and there is also a zoning board approval that's required by the city of Newark before we begin any kind of installation, and then there is also a lease agreement. So this particular consultant acts as the district's agent.
Ms. Wilson,
Yes, sir.
can you explain the corrective action plan for the early childhood?
We do have a corrective action plan for if you will remember, I think last board meeting, you were presented with the audit results for an audit of that particular early childhood provider. This is now the corrective action plan associated with that. These audits are somewhat late in nature, and we are working to come up to par with them and to be on time with the audits. They're rather large pieces. As you know, our preschool aid is significant in nature and requires quite a bit of monitoring and oversight. I am working with the early childhood department to ensure that, one, we are on time with our audits, and two, that we have met the requirements necessary.
Vice Chair?
Ms. White, I want to go back to number 11 under the early childhood provider, Sarah Ward Nursery.
That is a new audit. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I see it says the correction for 30 days, or correction action plan for 30 days. I don't know if that's what he was mentioning.
No.
And I wanted to know 30 days from what date? Do you have a date?
The 30 days are from the board's acceptance of the actual audit. So once the audit is prepared, we present it to the board at the very next board cycle. That Sarah Ward audit just arrived to us from last week, I think. So you now have the audit findings. Next month, you will have the corrective action plan associated with those findings. So there must be 2 indications in the board's minutes. 1, to accept the audit, and 2, to accept the corrective action plan.
Okay, so that's not a motion yet. You can go ahead.
Ms. Wilson, would you mind just, I think it's important if you could just talk to the public about the steps we've taken, because both the audit, the Vice Chair just referenced the Sarah Ward Nursery audit, as well as the Innovative Educational Programs audit for the preschool programs, both found for both of those preschool programs a failure for a number of employees to have records of the criminal background check. And I know the district has taken steps since then to ensure that's no longer a problem. I think that sort of thing is important for the public to know about the steps we've taken to make sure this isn't an issue currently.
Understood. That is why these annual audits are required from the early childhood department. With regards to the audits that have been completed, you will notice that they are back in 2008 and 2009, if I am not mistaken. What we have done as a district to ensure criminal compliance, because that applies to our employees. By the way, it should be noted that these employees are employees of the provider, not of the district. They receive funding from the district associated with being ready to make payroll, being ready to pay for supplies, being ready to pay for all of those various things. But the employees are not employees of the district. However, the district is still responsible and accountable for ensuring that these providers have people who have been appropriately processed. The Early Childhood Department is responsible for following up on this, ensuring that when employees are hired, they receive appropriate employee records, which would also include the criminal history piece associated with that. And there have been some revisions in the criminal history law over the years to help districts to tighten that up. As I said before, I'll be working with them to ensure that these audits happen in a timely fashion and that the corrective actions are completed within the year in which the audit is applied.
About any other items?
Yes.
Vice Chair?
Okay, just for my own clarity, Ms. Wilson, on the No Child Left Behind Consolidated Application Resolution, because I'm not clear on it, who makes the decision of how much money is needed for each program, like Title I, improving basic programs operated by local education agencies? And who checks on the improvements, or how do we measure the progress? Is it the state, the federal government? How do we know, for an example, the grants for prevention and intervention programs for children and youth who are negligent or delinquent or at risk? I don't know.
Okay, Title I is also another major grant area. As you can see, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $34 million total. They are made up of various titles, which are defined by the federal government, Title I, Title II, Title III.
Right.
So those specific titles cover specific areas associated with specific children. Our free and reduced lunch applications are extremely important in this process because those are children who are determined to be at risk. So that is another driver as to why lunch applications are as important as they are. So title, without going into the full details associated with that, is designed to provide supports that the district would not normally provide. So to supplement what the district does, the district, it cannot supplant. It must supplement what the district currently does out of its general funds. So there are specific categories of students who are identified, there are specific services that must be provided, and those percentages are determined in effect by the applications that are received at the school level, identifying the population of at-risk students.
On the Title I. Okay.
And then all the titles come together. We do have a title department under a director with a set of accountants associated for monitoring those monies and how they are spent, what can be carried over if we have any, and there are federal monitors that come out on a regular basis, sometimes annually, sometimes over every couple of years. I do know that I think we underwent a Title I audit last year, and we came away with very good scoring on that. We were not found to be malfeasant in any area, and the audit was appropriate. We also, title is also included as a part of CUSAC and a part of, monitoring for return to local control.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Wilson, I had a question. I just wanted to make sure we're comfortable with the allotment regarding the change orders for the school construction stadium. Newark School Stadium. Because it seems like every month these change orders are getting larger, and obviously this one is for $150,000. We have a little bit less than $1 million left over. And I know we still have a lot of work to do, so I just had a question about the extent to which we feel comfortable that $975,000 will be enough to accommodate any change orders that may be coming into the future.
I can't tell you what will happen in the future, but I can tell you what's happening right now. So with regards to the change order, this is change order number 4 associated with the school stadium project, which is a project that is in excess of $20 million. The change orders are based on basically what we find on the construction site. As you know, Newark as a whole has a number of sites that are less than appropriate for occupancy by humans. At School Stadium, I do know that they have found several things. They found buried concrete. What else, Mr. Morlino?
This is Mr. Steve Molino coming up from Facilities Management.
Good evening. Some of the issues found are historic fill. Typical in Newark, a lot of areas were filled in back in the 20s and the late 1800s with what's known as historic fill. And today you have to address that. They put in a vapor mitigation system after the slab was installed for one of the community buildings at the school stadium site. There was a need to put in a vapor mitigation system. And what this is a piping system that provides an exhaust of any vapors under the slab so they do not enter the building. There were various other change orders requested under this proposal. Part of what's happening is there's a legal review going on of these things. In order not to have a delay claim, we are proceeding along with the change order with the intent to thoroughly review them with the architectural firm and the construction management firm to determine that they aren't an error or an omission. If they are an error or omission, we will go after those particular sources to reimburse the district, but not to have a delay claim. We're advised by legal counsel to move forward.
The contingency fund is determined based upon the value of the contract, and it is 20% of the original contract award. It is almost sacrilegious to expend over your contingency award, as long as you remain within that, and it is the district's intent to bring the budget in on time and hopefully on budget.
Vice Chair.
Under P1,
P1?
let me just ask the question because how do we arrive with this renewal of this contract?
You said P1, right?
Yes,
I just want to be sure. Okay.
I'm trying to understand, do we have the same amount every year since this is a renewal? Or I know it can't exceed $250,000.
No, it cannot, at a cost not to exceed $250,000. Typically, when we go out for an award, there are multi-year awards that we go for. This contract is a renewal, and I'd have to look at the actual action item to see whether it's the first renewal or the second. I just don't have the item in front of me. That renewal, in fact, you have a base contract term, which could be 1 year, 2 years. Then you will have a renewal for a single year or 2 years, or you could have a 3-year base with 2 one-year renewals. When we deal with gym floors and dealing with wood of that nature, specifically and primarily for gymnasium floors, we do an estimated contract price. We look at the trends associated with prior year expenditures and determine whether we are in line. Because when the district makes a contract with a vendor, you have a commitment to live up to the price that you have told the vendor or the volume of money that you indicate to the vendor you will spend. So you don't want to tell them $250,000 and you spend $10,000, because that puts hardship on the vendor. But we work with our vendors, we understand we have that commitment, and typically this contract has not exceeded the $250,000. So we feel that is a safe point at which to renew. It's the second renewal I'm being prompted from the audience. Thanks.
Any other questions for Ms. Wilson? We have a motion. Second. Vice Chair, call the roll, Ms. Pollard. And I'm sorry, this is a motion to pass all of the financial items contained on the agenda.
Mr. Jeffries?
Yes.
Ms. King?
Yes.
Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Ms. Pintor?
Yes.
Mr. Rivera?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Okay, sure.
No problem.
Dr. Janey?
Yes, thank you. Mr. Jeffries and the public, the issue of change orders, not just here in New Jersey, but in other states, has become a pretty big, sometimes political, sometimes financial, but at the root of it, it's become an unlawful issue. That is, you're making a change order for things that you should have done on time and within budget. I'd like Mr. Molino to give a couple of examples of what would be an improper filing for a change order. And the change orders for, as they are, for the school stadium construction do not fit in this category, just for purposes of clarification.
What is not allowed is a change in scope for a change order. A change order is for an unforeseen condition that, again, goes along with what was proposed and the design scope. If you're expanding the scope, a change order cannot be used for that type of a situation. So, again, all of the change orders we implement are reviewed at the facilities committee level. They're thoroughly vetted there. They are vetted through the architectural firm and the construction management firm and the legal department prior to being presented here. So they're thoroughly reviewed. And like I said before, for the sake of preventing delay claims, sometimes they are approved to proceed even though we hold the right to review them, analyze them, and adjust them on the reverse end, even though they're approved, so that there is not a delay claim by the vendor that he was delayed from proceeding with a particular portion of the project, and then he has the right to charge you for that delay claim. So we're trying to prevent that in a proactive manner sometimes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Janey. Thank you, Mr. Molino. We'll proceed with parent recognitions, and our Vice Chair, Barbara King.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you so much. I just want to say thank you to Dayton Street School for having us here this evening. And hearing the parent liaison, we all know how important it is to have not only our parents, but our community involved in the school district. It makes a world of difference. So, in looking at that, each day throughout the district, hundreds of parents are making a difference in our schools, supporting the children's academic success by volunteering. The Newark Public Schools Advisory Board Community Relations Committee wishes to recognize and express its appreciation to those parents and community members who devote their time, share their talents, and resources with children, staff, and administrators to improve the quality of our schools and the lives of our children. Each month, this board will continue to recognize parents, guardians, who support our district with parental involvement program consisting of activities focused on parenting, communicating, volunteering, learning at home, decision-making, and community involvement. Nominated by their child school administration, we are proud to announce tonight's award recipients. From the Central East Region, Deborah Bryant from South Street School. From the West Region, Greta Riddick from John F. Kennedy School. From the North Region, Tramika Saab, Dr. E. Alma Flagg School. From the South Region, Kalia Brown, Dayton Street School. Congratulations to all of you.
Another round of applause, please, for the Vice Chair and for our parent leaders. We'll now move forward with the presentation of our Superintendent, Dr. Janey.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. Before I go forward with two presentations that are at the core of our report this evening, I'd like to thank those who were able to make it possible for over 2,400 seniors this year to attend the school district's first college fair. There were a number of people in this audience who helped out. Next year we'll have it for juniors and seniors. The way we organized it was to have 3 groups of 800 students come in waves. So the students went around the arena at the Rock, and the College Board was there, Naviance in terms of students logging in for application. We had members of various unions there. The Plumbers Union was there, for example, signing up students for apprenticeships. Then we had universities, historic black universities to Ivy League universities. Students could apply right there on the spot, but we had an area for students to actually have their personal statements reviewed on the spot by members of our school staff, so they could go right into the stands of the arena and have their individual portfolio, their personal statement reviewed by adults, and then they could make their rounds. And when they finished, they sat in the stands, waited for their bus call, and another round of 800 students came in. So that's how it was organized. We will invite juniors next year to see to it that we're doing the very best we pledged to do for gaining access to good colleges and good universities. Secondly, before the two presentations, I'd like to make a point about the need for us to focus early on the school budget for next school year. The next school year's budget begins July 1st, 2011. We typically get word from the state in mid to late March as to how much revenue we'll be receiving, and then we're in a mad rush, a mad dash to complete and load up a budget within a week without the kind of community engagement that should take place. We want to begin this process even though we do not know what the revenue number might be. We want to share some scenarios with the public about what we might expect it to be and start that, unfortunately, in December. But the earlier the better, so we're not backed against the wall and backed up against one another when we get the call saying your revenue's been reduced, as was last year, $42 million. And we had a week to put together a budget and hold a community hearing. We want to provide the public with some scenarios based on trend lines that we've seen in the past several years. School year 08-09, when we walked into the budget in the spring of 09, we faced a $40 million shortfall. We met that shortfall without any layoffs. That was not the case this past year, where we had over a $70 million shortfall and had to face the tough call of layoffs. We want to present the public with some options
in December and rolling up until March, so we're all on the same page. And I'm going to ask Mr. Jeffries just to highlight the certification process that we filed with the Education Law Center so that the public knows that we're filling out the tent as we go forward with this budget process.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Janey. So the board, in collaboration with the superintendent, with the district leadership, maybe about a month ago, we joined a lawsuit challenging the state's decision to cut in the last fiscal year the $42 million from our budget that the superintendent talked about, which created a gap of almost $80 million. And we were one of a number of districts, not a large number, but we were one of a comparatively small number of districts that stood up and said, we're not going to simply look the other way as the state makes judgments that we think are going to hurt our children. And this stand that we took not only pertains to this current fiscal year budget, which again had the $42 million cut, which created an almost $80 million gap, but also what we're looking at in the fiscal year 2012 budget. And not only in terms of the operational budget, but also in terms of our facilities budget. Because it's very important for the members of the public to understand that the state right now is reviewing the long-term, the long-range facilities plan, and I wouldn't be very surprised, this board wouldn't be surprised, if the state takes off some of the schools that have already been approved for creation. That could mean West Side, it could mean Elliott, it could mean other schools. And there's also emergency repairs and renovations that we also want to have, that we wouldn't be surprised if those get revisited as well. So in the board and the district taking this stand in the context of this one case, not only has implications for this year's fiscal budget and next year's, but also the extent to which our children will have the world-class facilities that they deserve. So it's very important for the board and for the district to make this stand. And frankly, what the state did was inconsistent with the New Jersey Supreme Court's decision last year, where the Supreme Court said a little bit over a year ago that the SFRA, which is the funding statute, had to be fully funded for 3 years. And not even a year after the Supreme Court's decision, the state made a decision to cut money from that formula. So in any case, for those reasons, it was very important for this board and for this district to join in this effort.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffries. Speaking on behalf of the advisory board and the general public, we will come back to you in early December with the initial community engagement reading regarding next year's budget. Once again, next year meaning July 1st of 2011. Let me indulge the advisory board to sit with the audience and review an update on the growth gains students have made in Newark at the elementary and middle level grades here in Newark, and review for the public those schools that made adequate yearly progress. Now, as she begins to make her presentation, this is Ms. Rashonda Jackson, a graduate of Science Park, born and raised in Newark. She's going to share with you what we mean by a gain in terms of students growing and advancing in their progress regarding mathematics and literacy language arts. There were 3 groups, as you may know, in the NJS with respect to performance. Those students who perform in the arena of partially proficient, 100 to 199. Then there's another group of students who have performed in the area we call proficient, 200 to 249. And then there's a third group, 250 to 300, which is advanced proficiency. She's going to describe the movement from partial proficient to proficient, or partial proficient to advanced proficient, showing growth, what we call growth gains, gains in students growing from one area to another, not within the same area, not someone moving from 100 to 150, but someone moving from partial proficient to proficient. Ms. Jackson.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Roshonda Jackson. I'm a research scientist in the Office of Policy Planning, Research, and Assessment. And the title of the presentation tonight is Propelling Achievement and Measuring Progress. I'm going to be talking to you about the results, as Dr. Janey said, for the 2010 state assessments. The district has become fully committed to using data to plan, but essentially, the challenge that every district faces right now is understanding how you plan and use that data in a context that's constantly evolving. Now, if we look at district performance, particularly on the ask over the last several years, we can see that that achievement trajectory has changed dramatically in recent years, in part due because of changes to the standards. And it took 2 years essentially to implement these changes. So in 2008, we saw changes to the tests for the middle grades, grades 5 through 7, in both content areas. And then in 2009, we saw significant changes to the test in grades 3 and 4. Now, the reason why you had the standards change is because there was this overall strategy. The state wanted to increase information on student performance, increase the diversity and rigor of the test, and to also satisfy the federal requirements, the No Child Left Behind Act. How many people have heard of that law? Essentially, it says that by 2014, it's okay, all right. By 2014, we're supposed to have 100% of our students proficient in both content areas. All right. Now, since this law in particular, I'm going to be covering it in some detail a little bit later on in the presentation. And so I wanted to cover a few basics about this law because it can get complicated. Okay? So I'm going to show you a few questions, and if you know the answers to any of these questions, I just want you to shout them out. All right, so the first one, true or false? AYP and being proficient. So meeting the annual yearly progress, that's what AYP stands for. So annual yearly progress and proficiency on the state assessments, is that the same? True or false? Absolutely, that's false. Annual yearly progress refers to data for 3 different grade levels. For the elementary grades, we're talking about grades 3, 4, and 5. For the middle grades, that's another grade span. We're talking about grades 6, 7, and 8. And at the high school level, we're only talking about grade 11. And as many of you smartly pointed out, proficiency on the state assessment is just referring to each grade, whether or not you passed, or where you fell on the proficiency band that Dr. Janey described before we started the presentation. Okay, so what are the benchmarks for annual yearly progress according to grade span? So does anyone know any of them for language arts or for math? All right, well, here they are. In elementary, for the elementary grade span in language arts, you have to have 59% of your students passing that test. In math, you have to have 66% of your students passing. In the middle grades, grades 6 through 8, you have to have 72% of your students passing language arts and 61% passing math. At the high school level, you have to have 85% of your students passing that portion of the test. If you're a school, if you're a high school, and in math, you have to have 75% passing that test. Does anyone know what safe harbor is? Has anyone here ever heard that term? Okay. You have? Right. Do you want to take a guess? No? All right. Well, safe harbor is essentially when a school, if they're not able to meet the annual yearly progress benchmarks that I showed you for each grade span, they have another opportunity to meet those achievement trajectories, achievement objectives through safe harbor. And the way that they do that is by decreasing their failure rate or their partially proficient rate by at least 10% when compared to the previous year. There are a lot of different indicators, a lot of different variables that are used to determine whether or not you made annual yearly progress. Can anyone shout out the number of variables that the state or the federal government looks at to determine whether or not you've made that progress? Just shout it out if you know it. 6, 2, 7, okay. You're gonna be shocked. 41. There are 20 subgroups in just for participation. And when I refer to subgroups, I'm talking about different student groups. So there are 10 student groups that the state or the federal government looks at for each content area. So in language arts, there are 10 subgroups. They look at your total student population. They look at whether or not your special education students are passing, whether or not your limited English proficient students are passing, and they look at ethnicity as well. There are 6 different subgroups for that: African American, white, etc. And then also they look at economically disadvantaged. Right? So those are the 10 subgroups. So you have 20 subgroups total just for participation. And by participation, I mean that the school has to be able to show that 95% of their students showed up that day and took the test. They participated. If they don't meet that 95% threshold, then they may not make AYP. There's another set of subgroups around achievement that I went over. You got to meet the achievement benchmarks, whether or not it's the regular benchmark or whether it's through Safe Harbor. And then there's this last indicator that's related to whether or not you have decreased your dropout rates if you're a high school, or if you've increased your attendance rates in the last year. Okay, so if a school has been identified as a school in need of improvement, and this is a status that you're tagged with if you do not meet AYP, what can be done for them to come out of that status? Does anybody know? What do they need to do? Exactly, they have to show improvement, and they have to do that for 2 consecutive years. They have to do it 2 years in a row. They have to show that, that they're able to meet AYP, either through the benchmarks or through Safe Harbor and the other indicators that I went over. And then finally, true or false, can you meet proficiency? You can meet proficiency targets in all subgroups and miss AYP. Is it possible? Yes, absolutely, true. For example, if you miss AYP in any of those participation groups, subgroups, under participation, then you won't make AYP. All right, so here's the $64,000 question. Did our schools demonstrate growth? So as Dr. Janey pointed out a little earlier, New Jersey is one of the few states in the country where our scores range from the same level, from 100 to 300 for every grade level. So if you're in the 3rd grade, the highest score you can get is a 300. The lowest score is a 100. And it's the same for all the grade levels that are tested. I'm just going to show this again so you can see it. From 100 to 199 is partially proficient. From 200 to 249, you have proficient, and then 250 and above, you have advanced proficient. Now, if you have students from year to year, isn't it possible for them to go from one proficiency level to another? Right. Absolutely. So a child can go from partially proficient to proficient. They can go from proficient to advanced proficient. And a child can even go from partially proficient to advanced proficient if they're, been working hard. So what we want to do is to be able to show this, right? Ideally, we want to look at student growth at the student level. We don't want to just look at whether or not your passing rates are getting better in the 3rd grade from one year to the next. If I'm a parent, I want to know if my child who started off in the 3rd grade, if they've gotten better in language arts and in math from the 3rd grade to the 4th grade, from the 4th grade to the 5th grade, and so on. So in order to do that, we have to pay attention to whether or not students are moving upwards in into the higher proficiency bands. So this chart here shows you the growth for elementary students in language arts, right? And I'm just showing you the number of students who moved to higher proficiency bands in 2009. Let's do it. This is organized by region, so let's go through it by region. In 2009, that yellow bar represents 2009. In the north, for schools in the north, 77 students moved up from one proficiency band to another. In 2010, we had 187 students that moved up from one proficiency band to another in the north. In the south, we can see that in 2009, we had 22 students that moved up from one proficiency band to another, and in 2010, it was 85. In East Central, it went from 63 to 188. In the West, it went from 35 to 114. And across the district, we went from 197 to 574 students moving from one proficiency band to a higher one the next year. Now, if we want to take a look at this information, not just by numbers, but by percentages, this is what it looks like. In the north, you went from 5 to 12%. In the south, you went from 2 to 8%. In East Central, you went from 5 to 15%. In the west, you went from 4 to 11. And then across the district, we went from 4% to 12%. Now, that's 3 times the amount that we were in 2009. This is that information. Same kind of lens. We're using the same kind of critical lens, but we're looking at it for our elementary students in math, whether or not there's growth. So in the north, we see that 193 students went from one proficiency band to a higher one. In 2010, it was 337. In the south, you went from 80 to 168. Anybody here noticing the numbers are much higher in math? And in East Central, you went from 153 to 284. In the West, 82 from 155. And across the district, you went from 508 students to nearly 1,000, 944 students that moved to a higher proficiency band. If we look at that in terms of percentages, we can see that overall for the district, we went from 10% to 19%, scoring at a higher proficiency level in math than the year before. Now, if we wanted to look at this information, not just at a regional level, but at a school level, in 86% of the schools that had elementary students, more elementary students moved up to a higher proficiency level in language arts than the year before. For math, we can see that 79% of schools, more students moved up to a higher proficiency band when compared to the year before. At the middle grade level, we can see in 15% of the schools, there were more middle graders that moved up to a higher proficiency band than the year before. And lastly, in math for the middle graders, in 35% of the schools, we can see that more middle graders moved up to a higher proficiency band when compared to the year before. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that's nice, but are these schools meeting AYP? Let's take a look. This chart will show you the schools that made annual yearly progress for the elementary grade span. We're only looking at grades 3 through 5, and this information, just like the information before, it's organized by region. So we can see that for East Central, all the way over there to the left, my left, yeah, you're right, there were 2 schools that met AYP for the East Central region. 4 met AYP in this last year. In the north, you went from 8 to 9. In the south, you went from 1 to 4. In the west, you went from 4 to 7. And overall, we went from 15 schools meeting AYP to 24 schools meeting AYP at the elementary grade level. Those 24 schools are as follows. There were 9 of them in the north: Abington, Branchbrook, Broadway, Franklin, Rafael Hernandez, Luis Munoz Marin, McKinley, Ridge, and Roseville. You'll note that I have some schools highlighted in red, and that's because these schools are new to making AYP this year. In the East Central region, you had 4 schools: Ann Street, Lafayette, Newton, and Oliver. In the south, you had Dayton, Maple, Miller, and Peshine. And in the west, you had Alexander, Camden Middle, 14th Avenue, Ivy Hill, Lincoln, South 17th Street, and Harriet Tubman. There's 7 schools. Now, these are the schools that made AYP for the middle grade span. I just want to point out that overall for the district, we went from 13 to 12 schools. For the most part, in East Central and North, you can see that the number of schools remained the same. Also in the South, the number remained the same as well. We went down in the West. Those 12 schools, there were 4 in the North: Abington, Rafael Hernandez, Ridge, and Science Park. There were 4 in East Central: 18th Avenue, Lafayette, Newton, and Wilson. In the South, there was Miller. In the West, there was Harriet Tubman, South 17th Street, and University. High schools. Last year, we only had 5 high schools that made AYP. They were all magnet schools. This year, we had 8 schools, high schools that made AYP, 2 of which were comprehensive high schools. Let me show you. From the North, we have Science Park. In East Central, we have American History. In the South, we have Arts, Technology, and Weequahic. In the West, we have ABC, University, and Westside. This represents the number of schools that met AYP overall for all the grade spans that are represented in their school. So overall, we see that the number, it looks like it has stayed the same. But remember, I showed you slides where some of the schools' names were in red, and that's because they were new to making AYP this year. 7 of the 21 schools that made AYP this year didn't make it last year. And remember what we went over earlier when we were talking about AYP basics? You have to make, if those 7 schools make AYP again next year, then that means that we're increasing the total number of schools. So you won't have 21 and 21. Hopefully we'll have, 28 next year. These are the 21 schools. In the North, you have 8 schools: Abington, Branchbrook, Broadway, Franklin, Rafael Hernandez, Ridge, Roseville, and Science Park. East Central, American History, Lafayette, Newton. In the South, you have 4 schools: Arts, Miller, Technology, and Weequahic. And in the West, ABC, 14th Avenue, South 17th Street, Harriet Tubman, Westside, and University. All right. So what are some factors that might influence achievement? Right? Because we want those 7 schools to make AYP next year, and we don't want them to just sort of wish for it to happen. We want them to be deliberate, use this data to plan for meeting that goal. Here's some of the information we've been able to find out by digging in to see if there are certain variables that can change our achievement trajectory. So what I'm going to show you is the average language arts scale score. Remember, the scores go from 100 to 300. I'm going to show you the average language arts scale scores for 8th graders based on the time that they were enrolled in the same school. For those 8th graders where it was their first year in that school, they got an average of a 190. For those 8th graders that had been enrolled in the same school for 2 years, they had a passing score of about 203. So what does that tell you? Absolutely, that the longer that our students are in the same school, the better their achievement will be. One more, 3 years. If a child had been enrolled for 3 years, they got an average score of 209. I'm going to show you the same kind of information, but we're looking at math now. We're looking at 4th grade scale scores. So for the first year, if that child was enrolled there, they got a 191. If they had been enrolled at that school for 2 years in a row, they got a 209. And this is that same data, but for grades 5 and 6, and we can see the 3-year span. So for 5th graders, in math still, we got a 195. And if they had been there for 2 years, they got a significantly higher score, a passing score of 203. 3 years, same school, they got a 213. Sixth grade, math, an average of a 187 first year, 196 if you've been there for 2 years, and a 210 if you had been there for 3 years in a row. These are all significantly higher scores. And it should be noted that these schools are making these kinds of gains in a context of an urban district where our mobility rate is fairly high, right? Imagine if Our district is having real rigorous conversations around this data at the school level. What does this look like? And what kinds of gains can we make based on my child being enrolled at a school for longer periods of time? Because again, we're looking at achievement at the student level. Another factor that can notably influence achievement is attendance. You have to be in the seat in order for you to have a chance of passing the test, right? So this chart shows you HESPA performance based on whether or not you attended school for at least 90% of the time. And the blue bars represent those students who attended school at least 90% of the time. So you can see that you had a greater chance of passing the test. 66% of the students who attended school at least 90% of the time passed. Whereas if you didn't attend school at least 90% of the time, you only had a 50-50 shot of passing the test in language arts and the HESPA. And the math, we can see that 56% of the students who attended at least 90% of the time passed the test, whereas if you didn't, you were more likely to fail. 63% of those students did not pass the HESPA. So there's some actionable information here, right? We're going to continue to face the challenge of meeting standards, right? The standards that have to be continually recalibrated because our students have to be able to meet the changing standards in the workforce, in higher education. We have to be able to deal with those challenges. But at the same time, we have to dig a little deeper with the data that's given to us. You know, we can't treat it monolithically. We have to get underneath it and take a look at what's really going on. And when we do that, we see that the growth analysis really reveals that the district is headed in a positive direction. We're moving students to higher proficiency levels. And there are some important factors that we can see here. In the midst of all of this challenge, we can see that student achievement can be influenced by the time that you're enrolled in the same school, by your attendance. They can have a notable influence on your achievement. And so I think it's important that you have that as members of the community, that you have those kinds of conversations with your schools. As parents, as members of the community, I just feel so fortunate to be able to have had the experience that I had, to have gone to and received, Ivy League education, to be able to come back, to be able to really look at the kinds of variables that will make a difference, not just for the organization, but for our students in this community. So, thank you.
Is that what you want?
Good evening, Board Chair Jeff.
Ms. Jackson.
Yes.
Rashonda, Ms. Jackson, there are a couple of questions.
First, can we have another round of applause for Newark native, Ms. Jackson? Thank you very much, Ms. Jackson, for that presentation. I thought that creates a great opportunity for the public to have a sense of some of the data that speaks to student achievement. I had a few questions, and some of my colleagues might, that we didn't have an opportunity to get to last week at our business meeting. First, I wanted to make sure I understood the bottom line, because I know at the bottom line you indicated that the same number of district schools that made AYP last year is the same number we have this year.
That's right.
But we have 7 new schools that made AYP that did not the year before.
That's right.
Now, does that mean that we have 7 schools that did not make AYP this year that did make it the year before?
That's right.
Just want to make sure we understand what we have.
Yeah.
I mean, is there any explanation? Do we have any sense of why those 7 schools didn't? I mean, what may have happened at those schools that caused them to fall back?
Right. There are, there's some analysis that we have to continue to do, right? Particularly for those schools that are new to making AYP this year. We want to understand how it is that they were able to make that, that important leap in terms of their achievement. We do know that based on the information that we have so far from the state, they tell us the number of indicators that have been met by a school. And so I could tell you if there were particular schools, that you were interested in, offline, we could talk about sort of the number of indicators that were met by those 7 schools that didn't make it this year, what the subgroups are, where they missed it, and, where there were changes for those schools that actually did make it this year.
Okay. Also had a question about the, because you talked about the great data showing that we had, I think it was 12% of the children at the elementary grade level. This is a question I had talked about last week. So we had 12% that went up a level, either from below proficient to proficient or proficient to advanced proficient.
In language arts.
And I asked you last week, so that means 88% either stayed the same or got worse?
Not necessarily. And so, I think it's important that when, that statement is made, we understand that when you say that a student stayed the same, they could have been starting off in a proficient or advanced proficient level, and they've maintained that high level of proficiency. And so I just want to caution, you in sort of being able to understand that you shouldn't make a qualitative judgment if, you have a vast majority of students whose proficiency stayed the same, which is actually what happened in that particular case in language arts for elementary grade students. The majority of the students kept the same proficiency level from one year to the next.
Yeah.
One of the challenge, okay.
Yeah. Another way to look at it, when you're talking about growth gains between student groups that are performing in the area of partial proficiency, and advanced proficiency. What we were sharing with the advisory board and the public this evening is students who move from 1 to 2 or from 1 to 3. Partial proficient to proficient or partial proficient to advanced proficient. We were not looking at students who moved within partial proficient or within the range of proficiency. So it would be true if we were talking about actual proficiency rates for 3rd graders. I'm making up a number. Let's say next year it's 52% or 54% of the 3rd graders in mathematics were proficient. It would also be true that 46% were not proficient, because we're looking at proficiency and non-proficiency. Here we're looking at growth between those areas: partial proficient, 100 to 199, proficient, and then advanced proficient. So it isn't necessarily the case that you can flip it on its head and say anything other than the 12%, they didn't make growth, because we're looking at the bands of students between partial proficient, proficient, and advanced proficiency, not the growth within.
Yeah, and that, to just, put another bullet on that, I mean, there could be growth, as Dr. J.D. said, within a grade span, within a proficiency level span or proficiency span, but this analysis doesn't calibrate, it doesn't measure that.
But, so I just want to make sure I personally understand what it is. But so kids could have moved within the band. We have 3 bands, right? Below proficient, advanced.
Partial proficient.
Right.
Partial proficient, advanced. But at the level of the band, is it not the case that 88% either stayed within the band they were in the year before, or went from a higher band to a lower band?
In this particular case, 74% of the students actually kept the same proficiency level from year to year. So again, as I said before, the majority of the students kept the same proficiency level. And, you know, that doesn't mean that that's a qualitatively bad statement, because as I said, there are a number of those students whose proficiency started off at a high level to begin with. And those folks who even have sort of like a peripheral sort of exposure to growth analysis, you know, the higher that you go, the less room you have to grow.
So 74% of the kids in the language arts category, they remained at proficient, which is great, right? You don't want to lose them. Does that mean 14% went from a higher band to a lower band? Okay. Do you also have those same numbers for math? Because I know we had the numbers about, I think it was 19%.
I can provide them. It went from 10% to 19% of students moving from a lower band to a higher band. And again, you know, with growth analysis, you want to focus on the students who are moving upwards. Is there any sort of movement upwards? Because again, you're looking for that in the context of, you know, changes to the standards, to how the test is calculated, all the scores are calculated rather. So you want to be able, you need to know whether or not there's any sort of movement at all.
But can we explain, because I personally feel that I would like to know why, because as I understand it, at the language arts level, we have more kids who got worse, right? Because we're saying 14% went down a band, 12% went up. And I just want to know, is there an explanation as to why that happened, that we had more kids who did worse in this year than kids who did better?
Board Chair, maybe for clarification, the purpose of this sharing of the data really is to have us focus on three things. Student growth from one band to the other, which was significant. Also to explain that the longer a student stays within a school, from year to year, they will see gains in their proficiency scores. And then also the last piece is attendance matters. What Ms. Jackson shared was the fact that sometimes indicators can prevent a school from making AYP. So if I tested all of my subgroups, and all of my subgroups may have met the benchmark, but I did not test 95% of my students, that keeps me from making AYP. At the beginning, she also said that standards will never stay the same for the reason of rigor and also the reason for expectations. So as we understand that those rubrics may change over time, if we focus on student movement from within a band or from band to band, that is the right thing to focus on. And then it goes back to, again, instruction. And so that's why it's important for schools to focus on the data for individual students to be able to track, and also focus on strategies that get students to move from one skill to the other, and it spirals, because the standards will always go upward. It's like that mountain. That's not going to change because that is developed by others. But what we can focus on can make the difference. And if every child moves up the continuum, either within a band or from band to band, then and meet the 20 indicators, that means that come to school, show up, test 95% of my student population, and attendance matters, then we can always meet the standard no matter how high it goes up. So for tonight's presentation, It was to show that when we focus on the right thing, which is student growth, the gains that our district has made from year to year, just moving children from one band to the other. We can no longer focus on children at the bubble, meaning just moving them from one to the other to make AYP, because then you have slippage. But if you focus on having them consistently show growth, then you will show greater gains overall. And what we wanted to show was over time how far we've come. And it's double digits. And that's significant.
Yeah.
Well, but again, and thank you for that, Ms. White, but my question is, I want to know why, I want to know what happened with that 14%. Because based on the data, 14% did worse in the band. 12% went up. And so I just want to know, I just want to have a feel for what explains that.
Right.
And so that's the right question to ask. Because when I go back to the individual school level, why do students go backwards? What is it that we need to do to prevent them from doing that? But that's the discussion question you have. As we can look at our data district-wide, we can have some sort of, based on the data, some sort of response. But that's the work that the schools have to do to be able to then say, where do we go from here?
Can I just say one last thing, is that the year before, in 2009, for the grade span and for the content area that we're talking about, it was 30% of the students that decreased. They went to a lower proficiency band when compared to the year before. So essentially what we did for that grade span is decrease, cut the number of students that decreased or went down a proficiency band by essentially half, because we went from 30% to 14%.
And the last question I have is, do you have the math numbers also?
I do have them, and I can provide them, I think.
Because I know we have, because in math, the numbers we had, Ms. Jackson, were that 19% of the kids went to a higher band, right? Do you have that breakdown? Because you gave us the 74%, the 14. Do you have that breakdown in the math category? How many?
I can provide it. I can provide it.
You don't have that now?
I can provide it, and also just to let you know, it's a similar picture in terms of the percentage of students, cutting the percentage of students that move to a lower proficiency band from year to year. It's very similar. And I can provide you with that information.
Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, I'll go to Vice Chair and go to Mr. Lewis.
I just want to ask, based on the data you gave, you said that the attendance played a crucial role.
Mm-hmm.
So would it be possible, without having the correct data now, that 14% that went down, the role of attendance could be played in that going
Absolutely.
down?
Absolutely. And also we're talking about students who were only in schools, that the growth analysis that I showed was really for students who stayed in the same school from one year to the next. You'll notice a little bit later in the presentation, I talked about the gains that students made when they were in there for 2 years and 3 years. And I could also do that, going forward, because there are some other research questions that have been raised here that I'm going to examine. But I could examine that as well, whether or not, you have greater gains the further, the longer that you've been there. So I think that that's an important distinction that you've made, that there are all kinds of factors that are influencing that decline in achievement from year to year. We're only talking about 2 years, whereas the later analysis, we're talking about at least, 3, up to 3.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Can I just ask that that we receive the data that the schools that did not make AYP this year, that made it last year, can we see the data of their enrollment, if their enrollment increased or decreased?
Absolutely. The state will release this information in its entirety very soon. Last year they released the AYP data at the end of October, October 31st to be exact. So I would be looking on the state's website on November 1st. It's public information. You'll be able to see the number of indicators that were met by a school. So how many indicators did they miss it by? And what subgroups? You'll also be able to see, when you look at the actual data that the state releases for every school that participated in the state assessment at every grade level in January, you'll be able to see what their enrollment is in that file. You'll be able to see whether or not 95% of their students actually sat for the test that day, and then you'll be able to see how, what the achievement looked like across the proficiency bands. You'll be able to see all that information as public information.
Ms. Jackson, can I ask you something? Will instruction have a lot to do with the decrease or increase of the test scores? Like, because I know in the last 2 years we have lost teachers. Teachers have retired, and some of them were special in their role. Would that have a lot to do with why the test scores went down?
Absolutely. There are all kinds of variables that influence achievement, including, teacher quality, teacher tenure, teacher attendance, and those are things that I'm going to examine moving forward. Looking at how much of a correlation there are, in our district, because it changes from district to district. But we want to know how much of an influence, a particular set of variables have. Like we know, definitively that attendance for a particular grade level, for HESA, for example, it accounts for around 20% of the variation that you see in achievement. So those are the kinds of questions we want to be able to answer.
And can we also track the kids that came from William H. Brown? Can we also track them to see if their schools, what schools they went to, and if they was included in that number, so we could see,
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely. Yes. Other questions?
I'm sorry, any other questions for Ms. Jackson? The last question I have, Ms. Jackson, is your first slide talked about the trajectory of the district's performance on ASS has changed dramatically in recent years. I mean, what data points are the key data points you rely upon in terms of this dramatic improvement that we've seen?
Right. So for the third grade, as I said, you saw a huge change, but there was a significant change to the tests for third and fourth grade in 2009. And so in those grades, you went from passing language arts at around 60% to a lower passing rate for each of those grade levels. We're passing at around 40% on average for each of those grade levels. We're passing at around 40% for each of those grade levels. But those in sort of looking at the achievement for AYP purposes, you have to look at 3, 4, and 5, where the change to the test happened the year before, and you saw sort of an upswing in the percentage of students that passed that particular portion of the test.
Ms. Jackson? Okay, thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Thank you.